Hello, welcome to Pots and Trowels. I'm at Harlow Car in Harrogate at the moment, working at their summer show. So I thought I'd just take a bit of a breather in the garden and I would answer the remaining questions that you sent in on our Facebook page. So the first one is from Priscilla Sterling, and Priscilla says, up to a year ago my bay tree was in a large pot and was very healthy, but it was getting root bound. So a year ago I planted it out into the garden, but since then the leaves have turned yellow and are now dropping off. So it's disappointing, as the tree was given to me by a cancer charity in memory of my late husband. Well, hopefully we can revive this, because it's good to have a plant that you can remember somebody by. If the leaves are just yellow and they're not crispy and crinkly, that's a good sign. It might just be that it's suffering from drought or lack of nutrients. So I think the first thing I would do, Priscilla, is just check around the ground where it's planted. Dig down a little bit and make sure that the original root ball of soil isn't dry. We've had some pretty dry weather in some parts of the country, and if it is, give it a good soaking. And I would probably put a little bit of liquid feed in, or some liquid seaweed into the water to give that a good soak in. Give it a shake so any more of the yellow leaves fall off, and then just use a little knife or your thumbnail to scratch the bark at the top on the stems, and if it's green underneath the bark, it's still alive. So I think it's probably just suffering from a bit of stress that's weather related, probably the cold weather followed by the dry weather. So I think with a little bit of TLC, hopefully it will perk up and make some nice new growth for you. Jan Chappell wants to know, when is the best time to prune a peony? Well, we've got two different types of peonies. We can get the herbaceous peonies, which are in flower now. These die down in the autumn, so we don't need to prune those. But if it's a tree peony, which makes a large shrub, then they are normally pruned immediately after flowering if you want to. There's still time. They flowered in the spring, so if you needed to do a little bit of work on it now, you can, but you don't do heavy pruning with them. They are one of those shrubs that don't need an awful lot of pruning. So what you need to do is just thin it out a little bit, and any long branches you can tip back to a side shoot just to keep a good shape. So you could still do that now. Shirley Wright has sent a question saying she always used Fostrogen after I recommended it to her years ago, but she couldn't get any earlier this year because there was a shortage of it, so she bought Vitax Q4 instead, and she wants to know how it compares. The plants seem to be doing okay. Well, yes, Vitax Q4 is a good fertilizer. Fostrogen is. There's Flower Power. There's lots of brilliant fertilizers out there. I think the probably only difference is Fostrogen is slightly higher in potash, so if you're feeding your tomatoes and fruiting plants, maybe Fostrogen would be that little bit better, but basically they're good. And another one I like to use quite a lot of is liquid seaweed feed, because that has all the minerals in that the plants need. Catherine Hall says, hi, I had a camellia for several years and it has never flowered. Earlier this year the leaves started to turn brown, not good, and I wonder if this might be a soil issue. So I dug it up, put it in a pot of ericaceous compost and brought some special feed. Since then all the leaves have gone brown and many have fallen off. Any suggestions? Can it be rescued? Thanks. Well, it doesn't sound ever so good, to be honest, Kathleen. They do need slightly acid soil, but camellias will still grow in neutral soil. I think if the leaves have turned brown, again, it's usually a waterlogging problem or a drought problem rather than the acidity of the soil. And I think digging it up has probably disturbed it a little bit more, which has set it back. So I think I would do as I recommended to Priscilla, just scratch the bark, and if it's green underneath there's hope. Keep it somewhere shady, out of the sun, to give it time to recover, and don't overwater it. Keep it just moist to try and encourage the roots to grow, and hopefully you'll get some growth and eventually it might pick up. So fingers crossed, but it's not looking ever so good. Gay Hamilton says she has an Acer green with orange tips. Should it be in the sun or shade? That's a good question, because acers can be damaged by the sun, and normally it's the lighter coloured leaved ones, the yellow ones and the very pale green ones that are damaged by strong sun. So you would normally plant those in dapple shade where they're getting some protection from the midday sun. So I'd be tempted to put this one, because it's green with the orange tips, not in bright sunlight. A little bit of shade will do it good. You get the better colour, more intense colours with them that way as well. And make sure you keep it moist, because they do like that moisture around the roots as well. Janet Watson bought a jasmine, but it didn't last long. It's in a pot, but we don't know which type of jasmine it is, so I'm not sure if this is an indoor jasmine. I'm assuming it's an outdoor jasmine. So I don't know, could be the cold weather, but if it's the outdoor one, it should be hardy. My only worry is you've probably bought the houseplant one, which has those lovely scented white flowers, which isn't totally hardy, and if it's been out in the frost, then that might have done for it. So I think you've just got to keep your fingers crossed and hope you get some new shoots. Susan Ostermuhl says, how to manage my lilac tree for more flowers next year. It's 2 meters tall and only had a few flowers at the top this year. Well, they do grow tall. I mean, you could prune it, but if you prune it back now, you're not likely to get as many flowers next year. But by pruning it back, it will encourage it to bush out. And the flowers for lilac form at the end of this summer. So this would be the latest you would want to be pruning, and that would encourage a bit of side growth, and there's still time for those to develop some flower buds on there. But don't go too hard, because you'll find if you prune them really hard, it just encourages more growth. So it's just a bit of gentle pruning, and in the future the ideal time to prune would be to do it immediately after the flowers have faded. Then it gives it the rest of the summer to make some growth. Jill Buick, I have a Pittosporum Tom Thumb that has grown very large. Can I prune it right back now? And if so, will the new growth appear fairly quickly? Well, this is a lovely Pittosporum. It's got the dark leaf on it, and it has a natural dome shape. You can trim it, but I wouldn't cut it back into hard wood. They don't always respond to that really hard pruning, so it's more of a trim than anything. I mean, you could try cutting a few branches further back, but if you were doing a harder prune, I would prefer to wait until next spring, because then it's got a whole growing season. You know, we're past the longest day now, so growth is naturally starting to slow down. So ideal time would be in April to do the pruning. Jill Parkin, can you advise why my iceberg lettuces grown from seed are going reddish brown at the edges? That's usually a nutritional disorder with them. It can be caused by lack of water if they're not getting the nutrients in. So what you really need to do is make sure they've got lots of water. Lettuces are full of water, so they don't like to be dry. So it could be heat, lack of water and nutrients. So just give them plenty of water. They'll be fine even if they've got this reddish tinge on the edge. Paul Liddle, I'm new to growing veg and salad plants, but I have a problem. I bought topsoil for my raised beds and planted seeds, iceberg, carrot, beets, etc. They got to 50 millimeters high, so only about that high, and seem to have stopped getting any more top growth. I feed them once a week with seaweed feed, which is good. Beans are doing great, but they're still tiny, and ants are abundant. They ate the pak choi seedlings. You're not doing very good there, are you? So we need to get these things growing. I think they need a bit more oomph. The trouble is when you buy in soil, you don't know what the nutritional value is of that soil. So although you're giving them seaweed, which has got all the trace elements in there, which is great, I think it needs something a bit more. So I would buy another liquid feed and give that as well at the same time, or even a bit of granular fertilizer, something as simple as Grow More. Sprinkle it along the rows and then just hoe that in and water it in, and that will dissolve and that will feed the plants. And plenty of water. It's been quite dry in some areas, as I've mentioned, so it could be that the seedlings are just sitting there and they need that boost to get them growing. Hilary Neary, how many trusses should I leave on the tomato plants? Also, how often and when to feed? Well, it depends. If you're growing them indoors, then you can probably get 5 or 6 trusses. The trusses are the little bunches of flowers that grow up the stem. If it's outdoors, you'll get less. But what I always say, my rule is in the greenhouse, I pinch out the growing tips of the tomato plants, whatever height they are, at about the end of July, early August at the very latest, and that gives the little developing fruits lower down, time to fully develop and ripen by autumn time. So you're normally going to be between 4 and 6 trusses depending on the variety and when you planted them. And as for feeding, I feed every week with a high potash tomato feed. That's important to get the fruits to swell and to ripen. Edie, hi, I found white foam on some plants in my garden such as lavender, chrysanthemums and a shrub. What is it? Well, yeah, you get this little bit of white foam on them. Lavender is very prone to it, and it's commonly known as cuckoo spit. It's absolutely nothing to do with cuckoos, I hasten to add. It's a little grub in there, and if you actually pick this spittle off and put it onto your fingers, you'll find a little tiny miniature maggot in there, and it's the larvae of a froghopper, which is a sap-sucking insect, quite a distinctive looking little bug that sucks the sap off the plants. Doesn't really do a lot of damage, to be fair, so I wouldn't worry. I mean, if you want to get rid of it, I'd just get your hose pipe, put your thumb over and just wash it off and get rid of it that way, but you've no need to use any insecticides. But if you leave them on there, it's not going to cause any damage to your plants. Same question from Bearbury McKendrick. What is the white foam on my rosemary? It's exactly the same, the cuckoo spit. So again, just wash it off, it won't do any harm. Mary Whiffam, what is the best way to get rid of white grey mould on dahlia leaves? Well, you could use a fungicide if you wanted to, but it's usually caused by the plant being a little bit stressed, is mildew. So it's usually either dry conditions or lack of nutrients. And again, with the weather we've had, they've been struggling to make that lush growth. So what I would do in this situation is pick any badly affected leaves off if you wanted to, and then give it a really good water and a feed around the base. Dahlias like lots of moisture in the ground, so make sure the roots never dry out. That will encourage lots of new growth. If it's still bad, then what you could use is a rose fungicide. That would work on a dahlia perfectly well, but it won't get rid of the damage that's there. It will only protect the new growth. So I don't think you need a fungicide. I just think you need to feed it and get it growing. So then that will be fine. Another one from Edie, what's the best way to get rid of aphids on my roses? I used water and soap and a specific product, but they come back again. Well, they do, unfortunately. You know, they're little insects. Some of them are flying insects. They fly in, they lay their eggs, and then the aphids hatch. So you can get rid of them, but within a week or two there'll be another infestation. So it's one of those things that if you've got roses or fuchsias or plants that are attacked by aphids, you just need to keep at them little and often. There's not one product that you can spray on once a year and it will get rid of them for the rest of the year. So you just need to keep your eye on them, and every couple of weeks check them and either rub them off with your fingers or just, you know, give a bit of soapy water to get rid of them that way. Elaine Woodford says, my lawns are getting covered in clover. I've got one with a tiny yellow flower. What's the best way to get rid of it? Well, that is, it is a clover. It's what's known as trifolium. It's one called suckling clover. It's got a tiny miniature little leaf. It's actually an annual, grows from seed, and it spreads and makes a mat of this growth, and then you get the little yellow flowers on there, and they produce masses and masses of seed. So once they've flowered, the seed pods open and it spreads the seed for the following year. It's quite a difficult one to get rid of, to be fair. Weed killers, lawn weed killers, this is specific lawn weed killers will work, but it's got such a tiny leaf, it's difficult to get the contact between the weed killer and the leaf. So you can grub them out by hand, and usually this mat of foliage will probably go to the size of a side plate, but if you trace it back, there will be just a single stalk in the center. So, you know, a little knife, cut through that, pull it out from the grass and get rid of it. The other thing is to make sure that you try and collect the grass cuttings. If you mulch mow, which is what I tend to do, I'm a big fan of mulch mowing, but you're just putting the seeds back on the garden. So while it's in flower, try and mow it so that you're collecting the flowers and the seeds, and that will help to produce more seeds being spread by next year. But it is a bit of a problem. It tends to like dry sandy soils where it spreads more than anything. So and then feed the lawn. If you get the lawn and the grass growing really vigorously, that will help to smother it out as well. And then I think the final question, and then I can go and have a sandwich, is from Alison Logan. How do you get rid of the weed grey mare's tail? Well, mare's tail, horsetail, call it what you want. It's a really, really difficult weed to control because it has a very thin black root that will go down 3, 4, 5 feet, even deeper in some soils. And it's a prehistoric weed. It's been around literally since dinosaurs roamed the earth. It's adapted very well to survive in, grows in most soils, and is quite difficult. So even if you use a weed killer, it doesn't really kill it. It will just weaken it a little bit because the weed killer can't go down enough to kill that root. It will regenerate from low down in the ground. One of the best ways to get rid of it is to just constantly hoe it off. As soon as it starts to appear above ground level, keep chopping it off with a hoe, a nice sharp hoe. Get rid of it, and that way it just weakens it because it will recover as soon as it grows. You chop it off, so you've got to keep at it a little and often, but there is no way that you will get rid of it completely, unfortunately. Even if you dug out 2 feet of soil and replaced it, the roots below would continue and grow. So you've got to live with it really, and just manage it the best that you can. So that's it. Thank you for all your questions. I'm going to go back now to carry on with doing what I'm doing, but we are going to do some filming here. So on Thursday, you can see some highlights from here at Harlow Carr. So we'll see you then. Bye.